Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka Mono Bluetron, back again with another episode of 10-Minute Testing. One of my favorite things about Duel Links is that it's reinvigorating interest in a lot of archetypes that were never quite playable in their time. Kind of like how all of a sudden there were all these Exeggutor fans after Pokemon Go came out, Duel Links is almost single-handedly responsible for reminding us that Red Eyes, Ninja, and most recently Ancient Gear still exist. After grinding out dozens of matches on the app, I found my thirst for gears was not yet quenched, so we're turning to the TCG's radically different take on AG, alongside some new support that triggers the same fear I get when I see Shadow Fusion. So let's jump into Deck Edit and see if I can have as much fun fusion summoning as I do repeatedly losing to Cyber Angel. So here's the list. Now as you can see, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, around the hand traps and evenly matched. So, as always, I'll give you a little bit of history about the archetype, a little bit of a discussion about what I hope the deck can do, and as always, the card by card. So firstly, for those of you who don't know, Ancient Gear is an archetype used primarily by Valen Crowler, though the cards show up in about 40 people's decks over the course of the anime. They usually come from early GX, and like early GX monsters, they seem to consist of a bunch of non-linear, random effects stapled to beat sticks of various sizes. The most common of these effects was that your opponent can't activate spell or trap cards when these giant gear boys attack, and that sort of became the identity of the archetype. They were doomed to forever roam the ancient sandscape, looking for a duelist who liked tributing monsters. Until recently, when they got a series of new monsters that took the archetype in a completely different direction. With the release of Ancient Gear Hunting Hound and Ancient Gear Catapult, the deck suddenly had access not only to powerful linear plays that summoned tons of beatsticks and searched cards with the similarly spoiled Ancient Gear Wyvern, it also had access to giant fusion behemoths. While it was a janky OTK deck now instead of an unplayable Monarch ripoff, it still wasn't nearly powerful enough to compete, which brings us to now. We've received a few more pieces of Ancient Gear support, which both make some legacy support, like Ancient Gear Box, halfway playable, but also makes summoning these super restrictive fusion monsters much easier, Ancient Gearframe and Ancient Gear Fusion. Unfortunately, the deck doesn't benefit much from going first. Spending all your resources on a big honkin' kaiju target isn't very appealing. The deck now has a lot of flexibility as a puzzle deck that builds an OTK by maxing out on hand traps and going second. We're hoping to finagle our way to an ultimate pound on our side of the board in the Ancient Gear Fusion to OTK with Chaos Giant, though swarming the board with 3,000 attack monsters and repeated Gear Town activation seems pretty strong too. Now if nothing else, our hand trap should ensure that our incredibly valuable monsters like Ancient Gear Wyvern, it is just a +1, allow us to capitalize on stifling our opponent's plays by gearing up for massive OTK turns after we're done searching what we need. Get it? Gearing up. So, with that, let's jump into the card by card. First, we are playing one copy of Reactor Dragon. This is just here so we have a reasonably enormous monster to fetch when our Gear Town dies and we either have not enough combo pieces or too many. Next is one Ultimate Pound, which hilariously only comes at common. Next are 3 Wyvern, which adds an Ancient Gear to hand, and 2 Gearframe, who can discard a card to fetch Fusion and has the right stat line for our next card, which we're almost always searching with Wyvern, Gearbox. Finally, we have Hunting Hound, who Fusion summons, but got a lot worse after Fusion was released. Finally, since we're an OTK deck with not a lot of great board building options, we're going to pick to go second and max out on the tools that allow us to do so. 1 Gofu, 3 Ash Blossom, 3 Ghost Ogre, and 1 Max C. Next are our spells. 1 Pot of Desires, please don't crucify me in the comments. 2 Foolish Burial Goods to send 1 of our 3 Ancient Gear Catapults. 2 Fusion, since it's pretty searchable. 3 copies of Terraforming. 3 Gear Town, and 3 of the card I'm the most torn on, Fortress. It's like a bad Gear Town, but most importantly, it's something that sits face up on the field and isn't a monster for catapult activations when we can't find terraforming. Finally, we have 1 limiter removal to OTK and 3 evenly matched. In the extra, we have 2 copies of Chaos Giant, 1 copy of Megaton Golem and its best friend, 1 Ultimate, 2 copies of Howitzer, 1 Borreload, 1 Firewall, 1 Summon Sork, 1 Decode, 2 Proxy Dragon, 2 Link Spider, and 1 Link Karibo. Now remember that we can make a token with Catapult, so there are a lot of scenarios where making a token to Firewall are pretty possible with Gofu. For games, I've had to be a little stingy, since most of my attempts ended up like this. Or like this. Oh my god, it's turn 2, come on! Enjoy what I hope will be some watchable games. So our first match is up against Jack Knights, and Jesus Christ, what do Jack Knights do? I would like to get through my entire Yu-Gi-Oh! Career without ever having to read one of these bad boys, so Konami, could you just make sure they're not very good? Thank you. Unfortunately, we're going first, and we've opened quite well, but not very good against Maxi. Usually Maxi doesn't do very much against this deck because we're just assembling lethal on the draw anyway, but when we're going first and have to set up, we can't really make the sit on howitzer style of gameplay that I like doing while Maxi is in effect. So we'll start by activating Gear Town and fire off this catapult. They'll chain Maxi. That's not very good. I decide I'll just use this turn to accrue resources resources. We're going to get a Wyvern, and off of the Gear Town, we're going to get a copy of Ancient Gearframe. That Wyvern's going to get us a copy of Fortress, which means our opponent can't activate things in response to Ancient Gear things we do. Pretty important against a handful of disruption. They're going to go into Blue Jack Knight, draw a bunch of cards, go into Cobalt, move that sucker over, of course, then Lavender Dusk, banishing the blue, and then summoning Crimson Lotus. So they're going to get over the Gearframe, over the Wyvern, and then attack us directly for 2,500. So I think this is actually lethal, especially after we draw the second copy of Terraforming off the top. We'll go ahead and get our Gear Town number 2, destroy that with the Catapult in Graveyard in order to get a token and a copy of Wyvern. We're going to use the Wyvern to get a copy of Fusion, then we're going to use the other Terraforming for another Gear Town. Now this costs 1 less tribute. We'll tribute summon Ultimate Pound, use Fusion from deck to get Chaos Ancient Gear Giant, and the time for activating cards is basically over. We're going to attack for 21, 22, 2,000, and this is exact lethal. He'll chain Call of the Haunted, but that makes a replay occur, and we get over for even more. So very interesting game 1, but really doesn't tell me very much about the quality of the deck, mostly because we don't really know if Jack Knights are going to be meta or not. Now, this is something you're much more likely to see in an upcoming meta. It's TDABC, splashing Grinder Golems, famously a very good card on this channel. We're going second, which is exactly where we want to be. We have a Gearbox, which is not where we want to be, but we do have a fantastic going second tool, and our opponent has bricked into like a Ghost Ogre and a Regeki, which are not very good going first. They're going to start by normal summoning this gold gadget that gets them the B out of their hand, and they will make Bujenti Tsukiyomi like it's 2015. They'll draw into a Grinder Golem and an Ash Blossom, which is okay, but not great. We'll start by activating Terraforming for our copy of Gear Town, then we'll Foolish away a copy of Catapult, but unfortunately that doesn't work. We'll get another copy of Gear Town just to thin our deck. We'll go into battle phase, Struggling Battle. He will go ahead and banish the Tsukiyomi. We'll use the effect of Ancient Gear Hunting Hound to make Howitzer. We'll dome him for 1,000 and just start chipping in. So he's got 1 card, I've got 1 card, 2 in hand. I'm feeling okay. And then I see the Grinder Golem token. So now I'm feeling a little less okay. You've all seen this play before, probably. Go into Akashic, return the Grinder Golem, make it again, go into Security Dragon, return the Grinder Golem, do it again, get the Link Haribo from Graveyard and go into Skull Death. Basically, fix your entire hand. Just a fantastic mulligan. He draws into another copy of B. No C for ABC, which is pretty good news for us. He's going to special this gold gadget, which allows him to special the B Buster Drake, and now we're kind of up the creek. We're going to go ahead and get a Wyvern. That's going to get us a copy of Ancient Gear Catapult, so maybe we can get something going, but questionable. Then he goes into Baguska. So Baguska is really going to screw us up, but I don't think ABC, without, access to ABC, really has a way to get over a 3,300 defense monster. So maybe if we just get Howitzer, get Ultimate Pound, we can just sit on them. Howitzer, of course, not affected by other monsters' effects, especially the first turn he comes out. We're going to go into Reactor, and hopefully we can stonewall him until the Baguska runs out of Xyz materials. Not the best idea, do the Baguska shuffle there a little bit, but not the worst idea either. Our opponent's going to run out of materials. We'll Ash Blossom this Terraforming, so still no linear play going off, and ooh, there's the Regeki. So we'll go ahead and take 24 and 28. We're not dead yet, and we do have a struggling battle, so all we're going to have to deal with is this Skull Death. We have a myriad of ways of doing it, but a second Gear Town isn't going to do it when our opponent is able to Ash the activation of the Gear Town in Graveyard. So now we have to be happy with just a Link Haribo to prevent us from, dying. Our opponent draws into another Grinder Golem, but thankfully it doesn't actually do a whole lot since we've eaten up the other spot. They're going to go into one of these new Link 2s, which will change to 0 and then pass it back. We really need to draw the nuts here. We draw into an Ash Blossom, which is okay, especially if they attack first with the other guy. At the very least, we're not going to die this turn. So we'll take 1,200. They'll pass it back one more time, and this might be all she wrote. We draw into an evenly matched. We're going to go ahead and banish what we can, and then in main phase 2, reveal and concede. So, a much closer game 2 than I imagined, but really the outcome I expected. Really goes to show the power of individual hand traps. If one of those ashes had not existed in my opponent's hand, I could have walked away with it very easily, but alternatively, it was only by virtue of ashes and, well, evenly matched that I was able to be in the game at all. Really, though, Grinder Golem putting him over the top. Our third match is the only match that's going to matter once these cards hit the TCG. I am, of course, talking about the Mirror, and we're going second, so I think we're slightly favored, despite drawing the only good go-first card in our deck. Our opponent is going to start by, well, you guessed it, activating this copy of Terraforming to get a copy of Gear Town and then firing off a Catapult. Can't really interact with this because I didn't really draw a hand trap, and whoa, is that vanilla Ancient Gear Golem? He does not want to take me to Pound Town. He's going to go into a Reactor as well and a Wyvern, getting himself a copy of Fortress, preventing me from really responding to anything. I'll just immediately struggling, and he keeps the Reactor, which is probably correct. Stupidly, I forget that Reactor has the age-old Ancient Gear effect that prevents me from activating the effects of spells, traps, or monsters after it attacks, that prevents the activation of this fortress that I thought I was so sneaky by setting. He goes into a Utopia of the Lightning as well. I draw another struggling battle, so really all I have to deal with is this reactor, and I think potentially Skill Drain can do that. It won't be able to pop spells and traps, and that means that we're going to at least live one more turn, but we gotta draw something pretty choice right here. We do draw a Catapult, which is basically the best draw on our deck. We'll go ahead and get our own reactor as well as a copy of Gearframe. We'll go ahead and fire our reactor at his reactor, then destroy the Skill Drain so we can use the Gearframe to get ourselves a copy of Fusion. Now I have big plans for this Fusion, despite the fact that I just put the only ultimate pound in my deck in the graveyard. Our opponent's going to go into Gold Gadget and Gear Town and attack over for 100. Come on, you couldn't have 1700 attack. Oh well. We draw into a Wyvern, which is probably the best draw on our deck. We're going to get ourselves a copy of Ancient Gear Fortress. That's the only target that we can effectively catapult. We're going to get a token and a reactor and attack over this sucker. He doesn't have any more targets left in the deck, so we'll attack as well. Then Fusion, second main for Howitzer, do another 1000, and suddenly this is a close game. Unfortunately, it is about to swing once more as my opponent banishes his catapult from graveyard to get a token destroying the Gear Town and a reactor that crashes into my Howitzer, of course preventing its effect from going off. So we draw into a Wyvern, once again a fantastic draw from us. It's just back and forth, back and forth. We'll send reactors into each other and the Wyvern into the token. Our opponent draws, and finally we fade a draw step. It's Gadget. He's going to go ahead and call monster cards, then concede. So we're back with the deck. I gotta say, that was one of the most exciting mirrors I've ever played. I'll warn you in advance that the games you saw today were not indicative of how the games usually played out. Most of the time I would either assemble an Ancient Gear Chaos Giant and wipe away the entire universe in one fell swoop, or I would brick into the sun, but that's not particularly fun to watch over and over. Now, I hesitate to say this deck is good, and I think that's because the viability of going second with the current suite of hand traps is high enough that any consistent OTK deck might be able to fool you into thinking that it's good. And while Ancient Gear puts up a pretty strong showing for being that deck, it's probably not the best option. I don't think their new tools are too fantastic. I originally thought Gearframe competed with Wyvern, and it certainly doesn't. It's not particularly useful for anything more than a better box target than Gadget, and Shaddoll Fusion, AG Fusion is not. Despite that, I had a blast playing the deck, even if I did end up a little bit disappointed. So that's that. Thank you for being with me, slackers! If you want to see me play the decks I make on this show on stream, I'm on twitch.tv/monobluetron every Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time, links in the description, and if you have an idea for a deck you want to see me play on a future episode of this show, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see what I can do. Otherwise, I'll see you Monday.